All right, welcome back to Bayou Town. What a panel we have for you right now. We'll start left to right because we have a retired historian. He's a retired American history teacher and historian, Mr. Gary Phillips. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Martin.
Seems
Glad
like
to
I
be here.
just saw you Friday at Vanderbilt, and I'll see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you,
Always
sir. Glad to
good
be
to
here.
see you.
Thank you.
We have the sheriff of Terrebonne Parish, Tim Saunier. Sheriff, good to have you.
Thank you, Martin.
And also, we're a familiar face as well, Chief Dana Coleman with the Houma Police Department. Chief, it's been a while, but good to see you.
Same here, Morton.
I know you've been coming on. I just haven't been on the desk on your rotation. So
Yes, sir. Yes,
always
sir.
great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So we have the Bicentennial celebration coming up, and military and law enforcement are on the agenda for Tuesday. So, Mr. Gare, we'll start with you because you're the historian. This is great. This is great to get some of the word out, isn't it?
Well, it's been a real pleasure for me to research the military history of the citizens of this great parish. One of my early goals was to find ancestors who fought in the American Revolution and in the War of 1812 at the Battle of New Orleans. And through the help of Miss Patty Whitney and Miss Connie Gaines, I was able to locate ancestors who were part of the Galvez expedition, who fought for American freedom as part of the Revolution. And I found an ancestor who fought at the Battle of New Orleans as part of the Baratarians, which I think that's pretty exciting since we weren't even a parish yet, but we're out there fighting for American independence. Coming forward into the World Wars, there was significant contributions by individuals from our area, and there's just a wealth of information about their contributions, which I'll be sharing all the way up through and tragically ending with Charlie Company in 2006 when we lost so many outstanding young men from our area in Iraqi freedom. So it's the whole gamut from the 1700s through modern days, actually.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that your dad is in our studio watching you proudly from the audience, and he served our country well, too.
My dad was a 17-year-old who joined the Navy in the fall of 1944 and served throughout the Pacific to the end of the war and was called back in for the Korean War for a year during that conflict. And I think much of my interest in history comes from his experience, really.
Well, amen. And we're glad you have that interest because I know your involvement with the museum and everything else. And whenever you decide to do a task, you do it pretty doggone well.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be a part of this program. Thank you, sir.
All right. The Sheriff, you got to be glad to see they're giving y'all the whole night to talk about law enforcement. One thing about Terrebonne Parish and the surrounding area, people love their law enforcement. That's different than other parts of the country.
We're very fortunate with the support we get from our community, from law enforcement. And I mean, I know Dana can speak, but we're very blessed with the community we have. But this event, I think it's going to be really good because we talk a little bit about like from history, from the sheriff's office, where we were then and where we are now. We do have some pretty good footage or video, not videos, but pictures that would let the people see, you know, this is what it used to, and this is where we are now and how we've moved up from a smaller office to where we are over 300 employees.
And I think people would be shocked. I learned some new things about the sheriffs of the past. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. I'm going to let y'all handle that on that night. But if people really go to learn, it's quite enlightening, isn't it?
It is. And going a little bit about the history, like I said, I mean, you know, when I was looking into this, our first jail was, you know, I'll give you all a little secret. It was, first jail was a 12-foot by 12-foot log cabin in a gray area. And we got a rough area, but it was closed down due to bat infestation. So, you know, so there's a, you know, so when you look at where we were.
A wooden cell, all you needed was a cigarette to get out, right? You could have burned it down.
That's probably a good
Wow,
possibility.
that's incredible. That's unbelievable. And Chief, a lot of history with the Houma Police Department. I remember the old phones that were still on the telephone poles where the police officers had to stop and they went by the traffic lights.
Yes, sir.
We've come so far, haven't we?
Yes, we have. We've come so far. We're looking forward to this presentation tomorrow night. You have myself. You have Assistant Chief Dwayne Farmer, who is one of the descendants of one of our past chiefs who will be talking, have a segment in our presentation. And we have Captain Lusco, who is over our uniform corps patrol. And he is also a descendant of a retired, yet deceased member of our agency as well. So even we have past history, we also have some continued lineage that's within our departments in our rank and file as we speak.
You know, you mentioned Chief Farmer. I used to cover him back in the day. And just like everything changes in history, the chiefs changed over the years.
Yes.
The sheriffs changed. Things become more refined. And let me ask you something, if I could, Mr. Phillips. I guess the present learning from the past and always making things a little better, that creates history, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. I've always told my children we study history so we don't create it and recreate its mistakes from the past. And to me, history is stories of individuals and their contributions. My dad often told me he thought history was nothing more than the biographies of great individuals linked together in history. They come forward in times of crisis, times of stress to save this nation, to save this area. And I think in times of natural disasters, I think men such as to my left come forward to step to, in a sense, save us from the forces of nature, just as in times of war, individuals have repeatedly stepped forward to preserve what we deem to be so important and so precious. So no
Well,
doubt.
I've seen both these gentlemen on, especially around hurricane time and
Yes.
COVID
Yes.
time. They've just done a tremendous job at people like you, Father, too, in the audience who, for this current generation to forget would be a travesty. So I know guys like you make sure we don't forget, because that was a special time.
It's an honor for me to share those stories, and during my career in education, that was a real pleasure to share with my students the men and women who made such a difference in our history.
History we're surrounded by. The chief, of course, is the first African-American police chief here in the city of Houma. And we've congratulated him quite a bit on that. That's quite an accomplishment and just a great honor. But Sheriff, you uncovered something that a lot of people didn't know here in Terrebonne Parish, that we had 8 African-American sheriffs in Terrebonne.
I think that's our total count. Miss Scobie's helped tremendously with the museum, helping us uncovering and photos, and there were still missing sheriffs that we're trying to collect all of the photos, so eventually we can put them all up. I think we're probably missing about 4 altogether of all the photos of every single sheriff that's served.
And maybe somebody watching might just have one. And Chief Officer Lee Lyons had one of his ancestors was the sheriff. And,
Was one of the sheriffs.
yeah,
Wow.
of course, he became a police officer in the Houma Police Department. So, Mr. Gare, I guess I come to you with the obvious. When you're researching and you're doing all this, and first of all, you have to have a passion for this.
Yeah.
You don't just wake up one morning and go, let me go research how many African-American sheriffs we had in Terrebonne Parish. You got to live and breathe this, don't you?
Well, through most of my 49 years in education, this is what my first love was. In approaching this topic, the early days were the ones of greatest concern, so I went to the local region of the Daughters of the American Revolution, Ms. Rena Labatt, and asked her, did we have individuals in her organization that were direct ancestors of the Galvez expedition? He was the Spanish governor of Louisiana who led his troops, including French gentlemen from our area, against the British in Baton Rouge, Pensacola, and Mobile. And she said, absolutely. And so that was a vital piece of information. She led me to Miss Connie Gaines, and Miss Gaines' ancestor was part of that expedition. She in turn led me to Miss Patty Whitney, whose ancestor was at the Battle of New Orleans. That was a big help early on. Civil War, there was a lot of information. There was a tremendous amount of activity in this area that I'm sure most people are not aware of about the Civil War. And there were a lot of archives about that. Dexter Babin, the executive director of the Regional Military Museum, was a big help in terms of going to his materials, pictures, photographs of Mr. Augustus Brown, Tuskegee Airman. I'm going to talk about him. I'm going to talk about James Mormont, who was shot down in the Pacific, a Navy pilot killed at Midway. A wealth of information at the museum. And then there's the internet, tremendous amount. I went to the National Archives. Give me the individuals from our area that died in World War I. Give me the name of the World War II victims, Korea, and all that's readily available. So it was mainly just a matter of pulling it together and putting it into a narrative. And I was able to secure many photographs. I'll have a PowerPoint, and I'm going to close with a PowerPoint, kind of a slideshow of historical images of both local and national importance during this time frame. So it was a matter of just collating, really pulling it together. I've been working on it really hard for the last 2 or 3 months to get it. My presentation roughly will be an hour, and then my colleagues will follow me right afterwards.
Yeah, just like I had my dad in the Navy alongside your dad, same years.
Yeah.
Walking history books. I'm sure you learned a lot from your dad, too.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, during my career, I interviewed over 40 World War II veterans, and that was invaluable in sharing with my students what it really was like to be a 17, 18-year-old, 19-year-old in the military during World War II. Incredible information.
And my dad was good friends with the sheriff's dad down there in the country,
Yeah.
over there by the sugar mill. But, and Chief, let me come to you too, because you carry a mantle being the first African-American chief in Houma. When you go back to your communities that you grew up in, what an example that leads to others saying, you know what? We can strive. We can make it. Look at Chief Coleman. You've been a great example.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate that. And just to have the opportunity to go back in the neighborhood that I came from in my community and just let youth know that if you put your mind to it, hard work, dedication, and most of all, putting God first, you can just accomplish just about anything you want.
Mm-hmm. And I want to come to the sheriff too, because you put so much in. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So I could tell that history is not foreign to you, because you always have these tidbits of
love
information. You love history, don't you?
Well, you know, I think we spoke about my wife's grandmother.
Yeah.
And you know, fond history. She is still alive. She's 98 years old. Her great grandfather, who raised her, fought in the Civil War, and she can tell you all stories about her great grandfather. And so, you know, it's amazing when you start, you know, really digging. And you know, there's just stories that I think I shared some stories about my father and your father
Right.
during when they were in high school. I mean, there was only 11th grade back then. That's what it went to. But I mean, it's all the history. And his father fought in the Civil War. Look at me, World War II, as my father did.
Yeah, it was great
So-
stuff. And we learned that they had a strong liking to a particular orange tree
That's correct.
that the teacher of LT High owned. And she pulled them all into class one day and said, you know, all you'll have to do is come knock on my door and I'll let you in the backyard and pick the oranges. Valuable lesson.
The lesson learned, they said, don't jump the fence, you're going to get hurt. Just come around and grab the oranges, but just take what you're going to eat. Don't take more than what you're going to eat.
Well, there you have it. So this is coming up tomorrow, folks, and I want to thank this panel, great panel. It should be a very interesting discussion, and learn from it. You can learn from your past, and it's really fun stuff. We'll take a short break. We'll be back with a lot more. Don't go away.